On this video, I would like to begin a series of videos looking at the customs of the New Testament. Actually, this could be entitled Jewish Domestic Customs in Life in Relation to Interpreting the Gospels. I would like to do this in a series of videos. In order to accomplish this, I want to start out by just stating what I would like to cover in these forthcoming videos. First of all, I would like to do a study of the houses of the New Testament time. Then everyday family life, what it looked like. Looking at meals then, next, and agricultural activities, and finally, pastoral pursuits that the family would be engaged in. So it is my belief that getting such a background can throw light on the understanding of the Gospels. There's been a lot of books written by others on manners and customs, but this really is something I thought I would try to put up on YouTube concerning this background. In discussing, first of all, the houses of the New Testament period, as we begin, it is difficult to try to reconstruct exact replicas of the types of homes present then. However, we do seem to know that there was a smaller village type home made of perishable material, as well as the more elaborate dwellings in the first century that we read about in the New Testament. So I want to begin and just work through some of these together. When you look at the two types, for example, the small village home and the more elaborate city dwelling that would have a number of rooms, there is reference to both in the New Testament, as we said. A thief digging through a home, for example, would be evidence of the smaller, perishable, it would seem to me, village homes. This is in Matthew chapter 6, verse 20. While we go to the banquet at Matthew's house in Luke chapter 5:29, or a meal in the house of a wealthy Pharisee, Luke 7:36-50, it evidences a more larger city dwelling. And also when we look at the trial of our Lord. Let me begin by talking about the city house. First of all, we talk about a courtyard. The Jewish city houses seem to have been made primarily of stone, rock, or brick. Let me just say this. I am not going to be giving a lot of footnotes in this live video. I would refer, though, anyone to Google Books, where they can find my work on Jewish domestic customs and life in interpreting the Gospels, which gives all of my sources as to where I'm coming from. So if anyone wants to check those out, you can find that on Google Books under my name, Dr. Gary Stats. So as we move on, as far as can be determined, the wealthier Jewish homes were built around an open court, usually, it seems, in a rectangular fashion. The close connection of a courtyard with the rest of the house is evident when we read the New Testament, and not only the New Testament, but the background literature of the period. The courtyard then was in close proximity to the living quarters. We see this in a number of Jewish and archaeological sources. So as we look at that particular courtyard, we are told that it seems, no doubt, that we would find this in the time of Jesus in the first century. The pattern of a home with such a courtyard seems to have been characteristic, especially of the larger dwelling places during the time of Christ. Often there was a cistern and a place to light a fire. These were found in the courtyard, and it appears that at times in the larger palace, the courtyard also had two levels, a lower and a higher level. This was found, for example, it seems to me, in the home of the high priest who tried Christ. Also, it is of interest to note that a hallway or porch was often connecting the door and the courtyard, and a porter would often normally open the door to any visitors and then notify the family. These details help, I believe, to elucidate the gospel account of Peter's movements in the palace, especially of Caiaphas. Peter evidently came into the courtyard and warmed himself. We see this in John 18:25. In what seems to have been the lower part of the courtyard, just beneath the upper part of the court or chamber where Christ was being tried. See Mark 14:66. Mark 14:66, for example, reads, "And as Peter was beneath in the court, there came one of the maids of the high priest. After being accused in the courtyard of having known Christ," in Matthew 26:69-70, Peter then moves back into the porch area and again is accused by a female porter of having been with Jesus. This is in Matthew 26:71. This then resulted in a second denial in Matthew 26:72, followed then by a third accusation and denial also on the porch, it seems. See Matthew 26:73-75. All of this becomes, I believe, very interesting, and one can get a clear picture of what was actually going on when he gets a picture of this continued courtyard type of architectural arrangement in the time of our Lord. It is also interesting, as just mentioned, to note that in the courtyard of the homes, there was often a fireplace or a hearth, whereby the family and visitors would warm themselves in colder weather. This may explain then the reference to the demoniac in Mark 9:14-29, who was often being cast into the fire and into the waters. It is also interesting, as we continue to look at all of this, that this background possibly helps us to understand the young man who was possibly victimized often by a demon and cast into the fire burning in the courtyard of his father's home. Then we want to say a word about the roof of the home. In these larger homes, in addition to the courtyard, the Gospels make several references to the roof of the Jewish home. We see this, for example, in Matthew 10:27, Mark 2:1-12, and Luke 5:17-26. These allusions can be more clearly understood by a comprehension of what the roofs were made and how they were made and what they were used for. And I might say some of this then would have to do more with rather than the larger home, looking at more the smaller home. Normally, most houses probably had a flat roof composed of rough rafters overlaid with branches and plastered with mud. For example, the roof, Bouquet writes, would be flat and not made with very thick material, perhaps rough rafters with branches laid across and the whole plastered with mud. With this type of roof, when it rained, it was necessary then to roll the roof with stone rollers. Just before New Testament times, the tile roof comes into use along with the mud type. And it was probably this type of roof, it seems, that the men of Capernaum dug through when they let the paralytic man down into the midst of Jesus in Mark 2, 1-12 and Luke 5, 17-26. Luke speaks of them letting him down through the tiling, Luke 5:19, and Mark refers to them digging out. Interesting, the Greek word exaruxantes in 2:4, digging out of the roof. Thus, the men carrying the paralytic probably went up an outside staircase, it seems, took a piece of tile off the roof, and then after digging through the lighter substance under it, let the man down to the feet of Jesus. So it is interesting that we see a reference to this kind of thing also in other literature of the time. In addition to the reference to digging through the roof to let a man down, Jesus Christ refers to the roof as well as a means of escape when one is running. For example, the roof, while it was used for relaxation, rest, and fellowship, it could also be used as a place for escape. Christ therefore pictures some, no doubt, using their roofs for such purposes when we have that destruction, the abomination of desolation entering Jerusalem, which seems to have happened during that time of the invasion of Titus. He thus challenges those on the roof not to go down into their houses, but to flee. And when you think about this, it's fleeing then by roof, from roof to roof, it would seem. Such a use of the roof to make an escape is found elsewhere in early history. Josephus, for example, speaks of such a use of the roof by the Jews under Demetrius and Jonathan during the intertestamental period as he pursued the fleeing Antiochians from roof to roof. This is a quote in Josephus' Antiquities 13, 5, and 3. This helps then, I believe, to explain Christ's words in Matthew 24. Instead of pursuing others, we are seeing here that there will be the fleeing on the roof that will take place, especially as predicted during the 70 AD phenomenon under Titus. The Lord makes mention of this one and then warns his own disciples of the necessity of a quick exit and escape during the time of this abomination of desolation. Some are admonished to flee to the mountains. Others are exhorted to stay on the roofs and flee. Matthew 24, 16-17. Thus, those upon the roof at the time when this arises are to continue their flight, it seems, from roof to roof, instead of descending into the house. The roof was not only then referred to as a place for possible quick escape in the Gospels, but it's also interesting, it was the place where news was openly spread from house to house. We see this in Matthew 10:27 and Luke 12:3. And so it's the place where news would have been spread. Notice Jesus said, "What you hear in the ear, proclaim upon the housetops." This is in Matthew chapter 10:27. "And that which you have spoken in the ear, in the closets, shall be proclaimed upon the housetops," in Luke 12:3. In Matthew 10:27, Christ was commissioning the 12 to spread the message of the kingdom, and as they were spreading it, they were to spread it from roof to roof. While in Luke 12:3, the Lord uses this same Jewish custom to warn his followers of the coming judgment, as we've already alluded, in which they need to escape. So it was used to make announcements, to make news, as well as to escape. Then we come to the upper room. These would be in your larger homes. Unique to the larger city home, in contrast then to the smaller village home, there was the existence of what could be called an upper room or chamber. This room was often used as a place of retirement where the family would go. It was especially used as a room also for guests who would visit the family. It was in such a room, already furnished and prepared for guests, that Jesus celebrated the last Passover and also instituted the Lord's Supper with his disciples. This gives the reader of the Bible a clearer picture, I believe, of what Jesus was referring to when he said to his disciples in Mark 14:14-15, "And wherever he shall go in, say to the owner of the house, the master says, where is the guest room, where I shall eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large upper room, furnished and prepared. There make ready for us," Jesus said. Furthermore, when we look at the houses of the first century, let's talk a minute about the lighting. The house's lighting was provided by lamps, which were often placed in niches suspended from chains attached to the ceiling or placed in lampstands. In poorer homes, the lamp was placed upon a bushel used for measuring corn. The Herodian lamp was the type of lamp which dominated a major portion of Palestine during the first century. It was a rounded type of lamp which had two openings, one in the center, which held the oil, and the other at one end of the lamp, into which the wick, normally of flax, was placed. These were often rather small lamps of thin buff and light brown clay, fired medium hard. It is interesting to note that the ordinary lamp held enough oil for about 4 or 5 hours. It is possible, and then they needed replenishing. It is possible that the 10 virgins of Matthew 25 were carrying then such household lamps, and that the wise ones had carried an extra cruse of oil along with them to fill their empty lamps when they became empty. This background information then helps, I believe, to explain the plea of the foolish virgins described in the parable who say to the wise, "Give us of your oil, for our lamps are gone out." It is interesting here. We see this gradual decline and loss of oil. Thus, they were just on the point of going out, the text implies. The fact that no extra oil, though, was taken with them is indicative of the total lack of forethought and preparedness for that occasion, since the lamps would shortly be depleted and would not contain or would not continue to burn without additional oil. In view of the fact, as we look at the context here, Christ is referring, it seems, to his second advent when he comes in power and great glory. It seems that what we are looking at here is preparedness for that wedding festival that would take place in eternity when Christ returns, being ready. And so one of the things that we see here is he's using the illustration of the lamp to drive home this point of preparing for his return. Just as the foolish virgins failed to take along the extra oil to replenish their short burning lamps and missed the marriage feast, which I think is a picture of that eternal wedding feast with the Lord. So, in proper preparation, when Christ returns, will result in then exclusion from his kingdom. One needs to be prepared. The lamp is also referred to in Luke 11:33. And the more elaborate type of Jewish home seems to be in view. It is of significance to note that in Luke 11:33, reference is made to the lamp being put in a secret place. The word kruptain, secret, could be a reference to the vault or cellar of a larger, wealthier home. C.H. Dodd, for example, says, no doubt the cellar is also a feature of the more pretentious house, which Luke has in view, whereas in the cottage, if you want to hide a lamp, there is no place for it but under a meal tub, or perhaps under the bed. This is a quote from C.H. Dodd, The Parables of the Kingdom, on page 143. Thus, instead of hiding the lamp in the secret place of the more elaborate home, the lamp then is to be given a prominent place in the house. So in view of this, in Luke 11:33 to 36, the illustration is applied to the mind of man, symbolized by the eye. As the lamp, which is to fully let its light shine in order to provide the light for the whole body, that those are to do the same by focusing upon Christ and how he has demonstrated himself to be the Son of God, to be the Messiah. They are to recognize the true manifestation of Jesus, and just as a lamp is to be used to lighten a house, that's the way they are to let their minds respond to him. We see this in Luke 12:33 to 36. We've been looking, for the most part, at the larger home. Let's take a moment for the village house. Let's look at its construction. While the larger houses in generally were probably constructed of stone, rock, and even earlier of wood, the smaller village home was probably made of a more perishable sun-dried brick, which could easily be broken into by the thief or by a thief. Reference to thieves digging into such weakly constructed walls is found in early literature, in the Talmud and other early literature, And so what we're looking at here is that perishable or that home that could easily be dug through. We already alluded to this, but Jesus drives home the point with this in mind in Matthew 6:19 and 20, when he warns, "Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust corrupts and where thieves break through and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth or rust corrupts, and where thieves do not break through nor steal." The English word for break through could be rendered better dig through, as Art and Gingrich interpret the word diaruso as having reference to a thief who digs through the sun-dried brick wall of a house and hence gains entrance. So the passage is found in the Sermon on the Mount, as Jesus is giving illustrations concerning money and its proper use. Instead of using it for personal gain, it is to be invested for eternal purposes. While treasuring money upon the earth runs the risk of it being corrupted, treasuring it in houses runs the risk of it being stolen, especially since thieves could dig through the walls to obtain it. Because of this risk, Jesus exhorts his hearers to lay up their treasures in heaven, where such a risk is not present. The, the word diaruso is also used again in Matthew 24:43 and Luke 12:39 with reference to a similar experience. In Matthew 24:43, Christ is enjoining his disciples to watchfulness in view of his possible imminent future coming. He gives exhortation to his followers by teaching them concerning the parable of the householder who failed to guard his home against the advent of a thief. If he would have watched sufficiently, he would not have permitted his home to have been dug through. The Greek word again, diarukthenai. The disciples are not to be as this unprepared householder, but they are to be ready for the hour of his coming, since it would occur in an unexpected moment. The same exhortation to readiness, then, in view of Christ's second advent, is also given in Luke 12:39, as again the same picture of a thief digging through the wall is given. Now, let me just say a word also about the foundation of the houses of the first century. As we look at the foundation, in addition to such perishable material for the walls of some of these village homes, some were evidently also built upon the rather weak and unstable foundation of sand. We see this in Matthew 7:26 to 27. In a country of limestone, as Palestine is, it seems the wise builder would dig deep enough to find a stratum of solid rock upon which to build his house. Failing to do so will result in a weakly established home without any real basis or stability against the threatening storms. This seems to be, I believe, what Jesus is referring to when he refers to the wise builder. Notice it says, "Whosoever comes to me and hears my sayings and does them, I will show you to whom he is like. He is like a man who built a house and dug deep and laid the foundation on a rock. And when a flood arose, the stream beat vehemently against the house and could not shake it, for it was founded upon a rock." We find this in Luke 6:47 to 48, for example. Such a rock foundation is especially necessary because of the tremendous floods that can quickly arise in Palestine, making the small wadis into swelling currents or torrents. And so it's very important to make sure that the house is built upon a solid foundation. Jesus is saying, build your spiritual house on my words. And as we continue, Jesus then, no doubt, had storms and floods, such floods in mind, when he challenged his audience with the parable of the wise and foolish builders, in the Sermon on the Mount especially. After announcing and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom in Matthew 4:23, and having manifested the works of the Messiah in Matthew 4, multitudes of people were following Christ. The natural question in their minds, no doubt, concerned the means of entrance into Christ's kingdom. Jesus answers their question by stating to them that their righteousness must exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees of his day if they are to enter the kingdom. This is in Matthew 5:20. The whole of the rest of the Lord's sermon, then, is a comment on an illustration of the assertion, I believe, of this verse. The Lord clearly demonstrates the reality of this and of this declaration by showing the insufficiency of the teaching that they had heard and the practice in Matthew 5 and Matthew 6 to 7, and then concludes his sermon with this parable. In it, he seems to be exhorting his readers then to build their foundation on righteousness, which is found in him, the rock, and not upon the traditionalism that they had been following, which Jesus likened to the sand, in order to be able to pass successfully through the coming spiritual judgment of God, symbolized in the floods. Thus, the manner of a house's foundation and the natural weather conditions of Palestine became an illustration in the conveyance of spiritual truths in this early phase of Christ's public ministry. What about the layout of a house? It seems the layout of the smaller village home was probably, at least for the most part, a one-room house divided by two levels. The lower level being the place where the animals were kept, and the higher level, the section where the family lived and slept. So having two levels. This knowledge then of the two levels helps us to better understand what is going on in the Gospels. Let me just give a quote from Bouquet here. The houses of the poor in villages were, as they often are still, just one big square box-like apartment of ground floor only and divided into two parts, not by a wall, but by one part being on a higher level than the other. The upper part had on it the beds, chests for clothes, and cooking utensils, and was used by the family. The lower part, when necessary, could house the livestock, but when these were outside, it could be used for other purposes, such as children's play or any necessary handicraft. This is Bouquet, page 28. So it's interesting as we look at this knowledge of the two-level, one-room house may shed some light on the account of Christ's birth, especially if he was born in a private home. While some biblical interpreters have Christ being born in a cave, where the Church of the Nativity is now located, or in the animal stables of an Oriental khan or inn where Joseph and Mary had stopped, it is possible that Christ was born in the manger of a private home in Bethlehem. This suggestion seems possible from the evidence as well, since Joseph, as we read the New Testament, since Joseph and Mary came to the inn and finding it crowded, they possibly then went to a private home where Mary gave birth to Jesus. And so as we think about this, what an amazing thought that Jesus was born then, if that's the case, where the animals were, in a lower part of this type of home. And it's interesting to me, the manger then, instead of the inn or the cave, could have been the lower part of a private home where they were visiting and residing at the time when Jesus was born. That is amazing to me as I think about how the Lord was willing to take that place and to become the God-man for us. And so I think as we read these different accounts, it adds a tremendous interest, I believe, in the background and helps us to understand a little bit about the Gospels. In Luke, there's no mention of a cave, and we see the manger scene. And this seems then to apply to what we've been talking about, that Christ was born among the horses and camels that would have been in that manger with him. And it's exciting to me to think about how Jesus then was willing to do that. Following the belief that Jesus was born in a private home, it is really something to view Christ as being born in such a way that we see the Son of God literally becoming man and literally being born in such circumstances, and then later going to the cross on our behalf. And it's interesting to me that Jesus, I believe, as I look at this, was therefore born in a private home, possibly. And it helps to clarify the circumstances of his birth, in my mind, when one has a clear understanding of the nature and layout of the small Palestinian house. So I want to stop here, and it seems to me that it would be helpful, I'm hoping, to those that might be reading the Gospels to provide this particular background. I'm ending with a quote, and this is a quote from Neil, who wrote Everyday Life in the Holy Land, published in 1913. If all the rooms were full of travelers, this stable part would be crowded with strange animals. As there are no geldings in the east, many of these horses, mules, asses, and camels would be stallions, and the fights, stampedes, and confusions that would be constantly going on under these circumstances would render it impossible, an impossible place for Mary, or for the birth or cradling of her child, in an inn, for example. Therefore, in all probability, the word inn must be taken literally, and the meaning be that the whole of the khan was full. There is no hint of a separate stable and a cave, as tradition teaches. And when the wise men from the east arrived, they found the young child with Mary his mother. We are expressly told, in a house at Bethlehem. Unable to find accommodation in any part of the inn, and with all the Bethlehem houses thronged, they were thankful to find such a poor shelter as the stable part of one of these houses might afford to them. This is on page 58 of Neil. So it's interesting as we look at the house, we've seen the different types and the roof, and possibly Jesus being born at the lower part of a house where the animals were housed. And it helps us to appreciate, if this is followed, how Jesus in Philippians chapter 2 did not think it something to be seized, to be the same as God, because he was fully God, fully divine. He emptied himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. And then he also emptied himself to be born as a little baby in what possibly was a private home in the, we could say, the manger part or the lower part of such a home. So we need to worship our Lord, who was willing to do all of this and then ultimately to go to the cross of Calvary to pay the penalty for our sins through our faith in him, that we might then be part of that eternal banquet that he talked about. And we need to have our lamps lit with the extra oil along as we look forward to the return of Christ, being properly prepared day by day.